Good day, everyone. I hope you're all having an amazing day. We are the group 5, and we are going to present Module 6, Communicating Social Justice and Media Representation. I would like to introduce myself first. I'm the first presenter of this group. My name is Jalika DERAY, and I will be talking about learning objectives and the introduction. So in this module, here are the learning objectives. This module will enable us to comprehend the impact of media representation on several areas of society. And this will also examine the current and historical patterns in the dissemination of fabricated representations of society's marginalized groups. This right here is a significant question. How do media representations of the social world compare to the external world? Again, this is a significant question since we typically categorize media based on how accurately they portray reality. In fact, if media representations veer away from reality, their influence may become more profound. And as consumers, we often become more agitated when there is a scarcity or even an exaggeration in media representation. So this question that is flashed on your screen right now, it leads us to several issues. First, the literature in media and cultural studies reminds us that representations are not reality. Even when us, consumers, we sometimes tend to categorize representation into reality. And again, that is not the case. We, or this statement also reminds us that every product by the media undergoes through a whole lot of process, a process of which in slang, I would describe it as cherry picking, which inevitably results in some aspects of reality being highlighted while others are being ignored. All representations represent the social world in ways that are both incomplete and narrow. Second, the media usually do not try to reflect the real world. Well, as future media practitioners, we all desire to produce something that represents social events as accurately as possible. And of course, this only usually implies in news program, history books, and documentary films. But of course, as we study media, we understand how difficult it is because of the complexity of the process that every production goes through. But I think this second statement right here, we can pinpoint this to other aspects of media. Say, for example, the science fiction films. Sci-fi films, we can understand why it does not try to reflect the real world because it is fictitious. However, these fantasy or sci-fi films or fantasy media products still has the capacity to teach us something from the real world. Let's make let's take this film as an example. Black Panther, which by the way, if you haven't seen it yet, go watch it. It's an amazing film. Anyways, this is a product of science fiction film, obviously, but it was able to branch out to so many social realities, which also expanded the scope of Black narratives and their social conditions. Hence, it was able to uh, raise awareness among the audiences. And the point is that there is potential social significance in all media products, may it be a news program or even a fantasy product like science fiction films. And we as consumers, we just have to observe and comprehend what these media messages might be. Third, how media representations of social world compared to the real world concerns the troublesome term real. We commonly agree with the social constructionist approach, which holds that no depiction of reality can ever be completely true or 100% accurate, since it must unavoidably characterize a dilemma and make the choice of which elements to add and which to omit. Again, the concept of cherry picking, wherein there are some aspects of truth that are being showcased while others are being left behind. And finally, for the fourth issue, how media representations of the social world compared to the real world seems to imply that the media should reflect society. And in here, I would like to discuss the concept of escapism. Escapism is a way of avoiding an unpleasant, or boring life. And for many people, throughout the years, media is utilized to escape from reality of their tedious daily lives. Thus, the level of authenticity of media representation is somehow irrelevant to a lot of people.
Thank you so much for that, Miss Jalika. Hi, my name is Jamaica Sanchez, and I will be discussing with you the lesson one. In this lesson, we will discuss how the inclusion or the representation of people of color have progressed through the years. This lesson also points out that there is no biologically valid difference in the genetic makeup of different races, and that ethnicity, which refers to the shared cultural heritage that often derives from a common ancestry and homeland, is also a cultural creation. Racial and ethnic diversity in media. In this topic, we will briefly discuss how the inclusion of racial and ethnic groups in the media have progressed in the aspect of film, television, advertising, and video games. In the aspect of film, in the 1920s and 1930s, Black people were largely absent or were relegated to two roles, which are entertainer or servant. Not until after World War II did more African Americans begin appearing on the screen in an attempt to boost the morale of the Black people to get behind the war. Since then, the gradual trend, although uneven and incomplete, has clearly been toward more racial diversity in films, and in recent years, Black roles have been roughly proportional to the Black population in the United States. In the aspect of television, in the 1940s and 1950s, the presence of Black people were only limited largely to their stereotypical roles as entertainers and comedians, with virtually no dramatic roles. It was as if comedies and variety shows were the only regular forum for Black talent. In the present time, African Americans and Asians have been represented at or above their rate in the US population, but Latino or Latina characters remain significantly underrepresented. In the aspect of advertising, early studies of advertising repeatedly found underrepresentation of people of color, but more recent research shows significantly increased diversity. However, advertisements are now far more diverse, especially after finding out that a huge proportion of consumers prefer buying products or brands after seeing its ad that they consider diverse or inclusive. Now, in the aspect of video games is becoming an increasingly large component of the media landscape. A large proportion of representation or the avatars that are being used or are present are either white or male, which means that the gaming industry still has a long way to go. But one of the progress that this industry has made is that a lot of video games have enabled users to choose among several racial and ethnic categories when creating their avatars.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jam. So now I'm back to discuss about controlling media images of race. During the beginning stages of film and media, Asians, African Americans, and other people of color, or what we call POC, have struggled to represent their own narratives, stories, beliefs, opinions, and identities because white people controlled the entertainment industry and they had the power to choose on how they would represent the minorities, wherein they're often criminalized and represented as violent in the media. As a result, racial microaggressions against minorities arose because, again, the media, which is dominated by whites, have conditioned the audience's minds to associate the marginalized society with a negative connotation. Here is the film entitled Get Out, released in the year 2017, which is written and directed by Jordan Peele. Jordan Peele made this incredibly smart move to cast this story about racism not as a drama or a comedy, but as a horror film. And this movie was able to unapologetically expose the pervasive racism that exists in the society brought by white people. It also portrayed the agony of Chris, as you can see here uh, on the picture. He is the black protagonist in this film. So it portrayed the agony of this character to remain alert to racism in order to survive. There is a plot in this story wherein the family was trying to sell Chris's body, and I think it symbolizes a more subtle reality, wherein white people, a society in which white people continue to enjoy their privilege and are confined in their liberal ideas by their devotion to a status quo that keeps them in power. People of color, or POC, women, and others advocating for the rights of working class and the poor have faced a fundamental choice. And these are the two strategic approaches. First, developing an alternative media. This strategy is more practical since the internet is an easy access for everyone. The internet made it possible to open avenues that provide news, entertainment, and even political discourse tailored to various racial and ethnic communities. However, this first strategy compromises the chance to reach a larger and a broader audience. The second strategy is changing the mainstream media from within. And this requires an access to a significant financial resources. That is a heavy factor for this strategy, but it would enable a media product to reach millions of people. And despite the fact that some personalities like Oprah Winfrey and Russell Simmons, they have successfully done this strategy. But we still have to remember that privileged white men continued to manipulate the majority of ownership over the mainstream media up to this day. And although some women and people of color have progressed to positions of power and influence, they are still notably underrepresented.
Hi, my name is Cherrin, and for the next slide, we will be discussing lesson 2, gender and sexuality. So we will be talking about the media's history of women and the presence and their presence and control in media. So in the history of media, portrayals of women are just similar with what has been discussed on the earlier slides. It parallels its history of portraying people of color. Women are also often marginalized in all types of media, the same as LGBTQIA community, was also ignored and even vilified. Blatantly stereotypical images dominated the earlier years of mass media. But through the influence in what covers this lesson 2, gender and sexuality, it also tackles about the influence of progressive groups and movements who struggle for women and LGBTQIA plus rights. That this stereotypical image gives way to a wider diversity of images and roles for them. Despite the effort of mass media to ensure that women are regularly included into media, reviews of extensive literature on gender and the media reveal an inequality in the frequency of appearance of women and men. For example, women are not usually portrayed or not usually included with the producers. Some with the production as a whole, only small percentages of women are the directors, producers, writers that consists in a media production. The dynamics relating to gender are similar to those found in discussion of race and ethnicity. Women are generally not in positions of control, and perhaps as a result, they're less likely than men to be prominently featured in media products. With as stated by the sociologist Darnell Hunt, despite a few pockets of promise, much more work must be done on the television diversity front before the corps of writers telling our stories look significantly more like us as a nation. As stated in 1992, Fehez, that Fehez stated that men as portrayed on adult television do not deviate much from the traditional patriarchal notion of men and masculinity. Men are generally portrayed in the media as powerful and successful. Um, Here in the Philippines, we could also see the manifestation of the patriarchal society, that men are often the fathers who always do all the hard work, while women are just treated as housewives and dependent with their husbands. On the contrary, the dominant roles for women, as I've said earlier, would have been as a mother, homemaker, or a sexual object. Women are treated as commodities um, uh, in the 1970s or in the past decades. In 1970s and 1980s, studies show that women athletes were covered on television to be likely overly trivialized, infantilized, and sexualized. I could attest to this because um, with the rise of the volleyball competition here in the Philippines, we could also see that um, the cameraman would also focuses on the body of the players, and it is shown in the media. With Shell 1999, women were often portrayed as sexual objects available for male consumption rather than as competitive athletes. Now we will talk about the media industry now and as time progressed. Um, the media's response to the inequality, the media industry responded to feminists organizing for social change. As with racial stereotypes, the industry has muted the blatant simplicity of stereotypical gender images in more recent years. There is certainly a wider palette of roles and media images of women today than there was a few decades ago. If you could, um, if you could, if you have watched the notorious film femme fatale movie Gone Girl, um, I would say that it has been a trendsetter or one of the movies that reshaped the portrayal of women in the media industry, as well as the Black Swan and my favorite, I Spit on Your Grave. However, the inequality that women still face in the society as a whole is clearly reflected in the unequal treatment women receive in the media. So, whatever women has been going through up until this day, media has a huge contribution with what manifests, with the problems that manifests in our society to, to this day.
Good day, everyone. So my name is Cyrile Flores, and I will be discussing topic about sexuality and the media. So sexuality and media have had a very good relationship with each other, and I think they both work as one because they are part of culture, as mentioned by media scholars. Society helps media, and media helps society. For decades, LGBTQIA plus community has been either discriminated or ignored in nearly all media accounts across the world, not just in the Philippines but all over the world, especially in US, where the first riot about the LGBTQIA plus community tackling the fight for freedom started. Due to these cases mentioned a while ago, when you want to strive for a better representation, it's either you develop or you change the media as a whole. So just like any other minorities and victims of underrepresentation, as what mentioned earlier, women, people of color, and other ethnicity, the LGBTQIA plus movements have developed alternative media and worked for positive portrayals consecutively in the mainstream media. let me give you an example. In US, the development of um, alternative media has been changing social norms and laws and transpiring it to become, a really good safe spaces for people of various genders, and thereby, serving as a catalyst for dramatically changing media content. Contemporarily, it is same here with the Philippines. Although we still have tons of things that we need to do, it is, kind of same, and we're moving forward from that. But let me quote, something that Fejes and Petrich in the 1993 have said as a short history. You know, they said that films portrayed homosexuals until the 1930s as comic devices, a form of erotic retaliation, and to depict, defiance, perversion, and decadence. In 1960s, they were Marsha P. Johnson, whose reemergence was portrayed as best as unhappiness, sickness, or marginally and at worst perversion and evil to be destroyed. But LGBTQIA plus community and the activism that they have exerted are all unstoppable. That's why it is true that portrayals of gays and lesbians and other genders in mainstream films has improved markedly since then, and there was no place to go up. But before anything happened like this, before we reach this kind of status that we have, Amija Scollon, Craig, identified three media signifiers of what gayness is. So we have here the camp, the macho, and the deviant. Camp means they are flamboyant figures of fun and non-threatening representation of gayness lying somewhere between male and female, and one of the most widely found representations. One of the examples of this is Vice Ganda. We all know Vice Ganda as someone who's flamboyant and someone who's fun and someone who does not, does not push into the boundary of what is male and female. The next one is macho, an openly sexual look which exaggerates aspects of traditional masculinity as exemplified by village people. Who can we example by this representation? We have Tom Rodriguez in My Husband's Lover. He portrayed a conforming character of what gay is with a traditional masculinity. Now, the deviants, where gay people are portrayed as evil or deviants, possibly as sexual predators, or who feel guilty about their sexuality. There were many accounts that had this, and this was such a problematic representation. But such representation seemed to construct homosexuality as morally wrong. That's why progressive, conducted researches, and one of them is a research conducted by Stonewall, which conclude that LGBTQIA plus community were being subjected to symbolic annihilation. They found out that LGBTs were disproportionately consigned to the status of comedic relief, and we don't want that. Their characters being presented as something to laugh or to deride is not something that we want as a representation, because it should not be attached to a certain gender. This was especially found to be the case with representation of lesbianism, frequently presented as over-sexualized and exotic for males viewing pleasure. Now, I have some here examples of slowly increased realistic positive LGBTQIA plus portrayals. We have here the Brokeback Mountain. And this is one of the favorite of the LGBTQIA plus community when it comes to representation, because in the year 2005, homosexuality across the world is viewed taboo. But this film strived, this film defied all rules and, go for it. It's about two modern cowboys. Imagine a cowboy story, struggling with their sexuality and developing a love for each other. So it was kind of, sad, but it's fun. And it was progressive and it was strong. It made an impact with the LGBTQIA plus culture. Second one also is we have here in the year 2008, Milk was produced. The biopic of Harvey Milk starring Sean Penn as the first gay man to be elected to public office in California. It was a strong move because we are now penetrating the politically involved topics, and it was a remarkable film. That's why it's here. It's one of the slowly increased realistic and positive LGBTQIA portrayals. And you can see here Carol in 2015, Moonlight in 2016, Call Me by Your Name in 2017. At that time, I was just 17 and was just, wandering around what is my gender, or maybe trying to figure out something much deeper. And it really helped. It really affirmed that something in me is visible on media, and it's good. And transgender portraits have appeared also with Boys Don't Cry in 1999 and Trans America in 2005, marking major Hollywood successes. And it's important to have transgender characters and portrayals in films, because LGBTQIA plus portrayals are not just talking about lesbian and gay. We have the trans, we have the bisexual, and other many more. And I hope we can more explore on that on the future as media practitioners. I have here the significant dates on fight against gender discrimination, which media has also participated in. We have in the 1960s, it's rarely mentioned before because there is lack of, television access during that time here in the Philippines. But I just want to bring up that homosexuality entered the news as a result of gay and lesbian activism. So it's still, as what I had told you a while ago, media and activism, or media and sexuality, LGBTQIA plus activism per se, are working together. In the 1970s and 1980s, as the gay and lesbian movement gained strength, it actively sought fairer television portrayals of homosexuals. Now you can see gays and lesbians on television, but during this time, it was kind of problematic. And in 1974, there is a medical drama, Marcus Welby, that featured a gay child molester and suggested to the whole world that homosexuality was a treatable disease. But it was not disease, because in 2015, it was removed by the diseases. So yeah, gay. So this gathered a response with gay activists. Gay activists responded that by organizing media watch efforts that challenged the negative media portrayals of gays and lesbians. They also made sure to make way for gays and lesbians' chance to appear on TV. However, these representations were almost always framed as heterosexuals' view of homosexuality. So they have this view of what homosexuality is. But homosexual stories, or LGBTQIA plus stories, should come from the LGBTQIA plus themselves. In the 1980s and 1990s, gay and lesbian characters began appearing in more serious, realistic portrayals, especially in roles highlighting the issues of HIV and AIDS. Now, the response of the conservative and religious fundamentalist groups with this is that they organized to challenge the media images, objected the positive portrayal. So they objected the positive portrayals. They don't like the positive portrayals. And what happened is that it turns out the other way. Lesbian and gay characters have since become much more prominent on television, especially on cable. Since then, television has become dramatically more inclusive. So thanks to them, at least. And over 2 decades ago, up until now, Pez and Petrich of 1993 still, have the opinion that changes in mass media images of LGBTQIA plus did not occur spontaneously, which is true. Rather, the activism of gays and lesbians in confronting and challenging negative stereotypes played a decisive role in the change. So you can take that account to the LGBTQIA plus activism. Because of them, we have a more inclusive and more diverse representations when it comes to media landscape. Now I have here Nardi, who said, changing images are also partially the result of an increase in the production of media by gays and lesbians themselves. such as the lesbian and gay film festivals regularly held in major cities, gay newspapers, magazines that increasingly attract mainstream advertisers, and gay public access to. Now, what does this all mean? What do we conclude in this report? So, conclusion is that activism and progressive efforts in the form of collective human agency were significant social factors in influencing the media industry to change the nature of media content. It is because of them why we have a much more diverse and more inclusive portrayals. Through though LGBTQA plus representations have progressed across various types of media, LGBTQIA plus activists still recognize the need for accurate and harmless portrayals. That would be all for the lesson 2. And yeah, I hope you get the point that activism and progressive efforts were significant social factors. Why we have a good portrayals of LGBTQIA plus now.
Hello, I am CM REMADA and I will be discussing about class representation in media. No? Pero before that, ano nga ba muna yung social class? Ang social class, also called class, a group of people within a society who possess the same socio-economic status, for example, yung levels of wealth, influence, and status. No? Currently, we have 4 classes. Una yung the lower class. Lower class is typified by poverty, homelessness, and unemployment. People of this class, few of whom have finished high school, suffer from lack of medical care, adequate housing and food, decent clothing, safety, and vocational training. The media often stigmatize the lower class as the underclass, no? Inaccurately characterizing poor people as welfare mothers who abuse the system by having more and more babies. Welfare fathers who are able to work but do not. Drug abusers, criminals, and societal trash, no? Yung tinatawag nila. And second, we have the working class. The working class are those minimally educated people who engage in manual labor with little or no prestige. Unskilled workers in this class ay mga dishwashers, cashiers, maids, and waitresses. Usually, no, sila yung underpaid and have no opportunity for career advancement. Meron din dito ang sila din yung tinatawag natin ng working poor. And meron sa class na to, meron din skilled workers. Yun yung mga carpenters, plumbers, and electricians. Sila naman tinatawag natin na blue-collar workers. They make more money than workers in the middle class. Ito naman yung mga secretaries, teachers, and computer technicians. However, their jobs are usually more physically taxing and in some cases, quite dangerous. And third, we have the middle class. The middle class are the sandwich class. These white-collar workers have more money than those below them on the social ladder, but less than those above them. Dito yung mga doctors, lawyers, stockbrokers, and CEO, no? Sila yung mga highly educated business and professional people with high incomes. So, lastly, we have the upper class, comprising only 1% of the population na meron tayo dito sa Pilipinas, no? This class divides into 2 groups, lower upper and upper upper. Yung lower upper, sila yung mga may new money or money made from investments, business ventures, and so forth. And second, we have the upper upper, no? This class includes those aristocratic and high society families with old money who have been rich for generations. These extremely wealthy people live off the income from their inherited riches. So, yan yung parang brief introduction natin kung ano ba yung social class at kung ano ba yung mga classes na meron tayo. So, let's proceed, no? Dito sa class representation sa media, no? Ano ba sila nire-representa? Sabi, no, nung election ni Donald Trump as US President ng 2016, nag-produce ng good deal of discussion about the forgotten working class. Kasi parang lagi na lang white, no, yung narrative ng mga bagay. And much of that analysis and commentary was based on inaccurate premises that don't match the reality of a working class that is actually more racially diverse than the rest of the population and that is based in service jobs, not manufacturing. However, this discussion did stumble across one reality. The US media often pay little attention to the working class
of any race, no? So kahit wala white, no? Pag sa usapin ng working class sa media, hindi siya gaano nabibigyan pansin, no? And actually, no, sa Pilipinas, hindi siya naiba. Since yung landscape ng media natin, para siyang, parang copy-paste, no? Hindi naman copy-paste, mas parang mababang version ng mga Western media, yung mga pinoproduce nila. Parang doon talaga tayo nagka-adapt eh. Kasi parang yun yung ginawang basis, no, ng good films, good media, and everything. Tapos, no, interestingly, researchers have not given a great deal of attention to class in media content either, no? So may kita talaga na parang hindi talaga binigyang pansin yung media, yung class sa media, like hindi siya pinag-usapan, no? Parang all this time, nakikita natin siya as okay, no? Kasi there are fewer studies about class in media content than about either race or gender, no? Kasi sa sabi ng media, mas focus tayo, no? Kung nare-represent ba ng maayos yung race, kung nare-represent ba ng maayos yung gender. And ayun nga, yet, as sociologist Diana Kendall notes, even a cursory look at the media reveals that class clearly permeates media content. Regardless of whether journalists and scriptwriters or entertainment writers consciously acknowledge the importance of framing class in their analysis of everyday life, it continually imbues the millions of articles and television shows written and produced each year. Now, it is useful, therefore, to examine both the class distribution of people and the media and the roles given to characters of different class status. It is also important to keep in mind the unique relationship between issues of class and the media industry. No? Kasi totoo naman, hindi naman kasi nahihiwalay, no? Yung issue ng class, issue ng race, issue ng gender. Usually, parang minsan pa nga, diba, nakaka-apekto yung kung saang class meron ka para irespeto ka, ganyan, regardless of your race and gender, no? And syempre, no, sa usapin din ng issues between class and then the media industry. Yun. Overwhelmingly, no, the American society portrayed in the media is wealthier than it is in the real world, no? Kagaya rin siya sa Pilipinas. So kung makikita mo, kung mapapanood mo sa television, is kung ano yung mga napapanood mo sa TV, it is not just the reality that we have in the Philippines, no? Pag pumunta ka sa mga liblib na lugar or pag pumunta ka sa mga yung tawag nating squatters area or yung mga maraming hindi matataas yung mga bahay, no? Nakikita mo yung disconnect ng nakikita mo sa media at yung nakikita mo sa toong buhay. Although there are various ways of measuring social class that lead to somewhat different estimates, about 2/3, no? Sabi dito of adult Americans who don't have 4-year college degree, one indicator of working class status. Also, most Americans work in service, clerical, or production jobs. Not rarely depicted siya in media, and nearly half self-identified as working class. Media, however, portray the social world as one overwhelmingly populated by the middle class, especially middle class professionals. Diba? Yung mga tao sa mga manufacturing company, no? Yung mga service, yung mga clerical, yung mga tinatawag nga natin working class status, no? Hindi na sila makita sa media, no? Like, parang lead role, ganyan. Parang napakita lang sila doon for a short period of time. May makita natin mga main character talaga ay parang galing naman sa middle class, mga doctor, okay, lawyers. At isa sa mga media content ay yung family-based situation comedies. At ayun, no, isa sa mga media content, yung family-based situation comedies. I have example here, no. We have, pero hindi, before pala that, no, sinabi ni Butch na na-examine siya ng 315 family-based situation comedies that aired from 1946 to 2000. Because program-based in workplace, such as police shows, would dictate the occupations of the main characters, they intentionally exclude this. No? The focus of domestic-based situation comedies is home life away from work, enabling creators of such programs to give their characters a wide range of potential occupations. But Booch found that only 14% of such programs featured blue-collar, clerical, or service workers as heads of the household. More than two-thirds, or 68% of home-based situation comedies featured middle class. No? Kung mapansin natin, no, sa Pilipinas, yung mga situation family-based na comedies na meron tayo na, for example, yung Daddy's Girl. Sa Daddy's Girl, nakita natin, hindi naman siya, parang hindi naman, yung mga karakter naman doon, hindi naman part ng service, clerical crew, no. Yung buhay rin nila, no, ay marangya. Kasi si May, no, and then si Vic Soto, no, yung mga karakter nila dito, nakatira sa condominium. Alam naman natin, no, sa Pilipinas, hindi naman ganoon kadali magkaroon ng condominium, no. At mahal ang condominium dito. Tapos, nakita mo talaga, no, na overwhelmingly, nakatira sila sa beautiful na house, no, na equipped with all the amenities. And second, no, we have the Pepito Manaloto. Although, no, galing si Pepito sa mahirap na pamilya, pero eventually, yung buong takbo ng kwento ay mayaman na siya, no, working class na siya. Isa na siyang, actually, hindi nga, parang upper class pa siya dahil siya siyang CEO, no, and then, yung bahay talaga nila, no, and then, houses ay equipped with all the amenities, no. In contrast to the relatively few portrayals of working class families, there are large number of domestic-based situation comedies in which the head of the household had a middle-class job. Diba? Like, never ko makakita ng parang bihira, no? Yung mga situation-based comedies na yung magulang nila ay construction worker. Nagtrabaho sa pabrika. Laging mayaman, no? Laging nakaangat sa buhay, no? Or party nga talaga ng middle class. The few working characters, no, who do not populate some programs are divine exception to the norm. And therefore, it must be their own fault they are less economically successful. Yun yung parang gustong sabihin nung parang subtle pero significant message. Parang yun yung kino-convey na message ng mga situation comedies. Na parang, siyempre, no, hindi sila gumagawa ng paraan, no, para maging economically successful sila. Pero, yung message that people in working class are responsible for their fate is quintessential middle class idea that ignores the structural conditions that shape social class. So, di ba, mga working class, no? Kapag-aral kasi sila, and doon pala magsisimula, no, na hindi naman lahat ay nagkakaroon ng access sa education, no? Dapat nga lahat may access kasi ang edukasyon ay karapatan. Hindi siya dapat nakukuha siya at natatamasan ng karamihan. Pero yun nga, ito mga middle class, no, maaabot nila yung mga ganung trabaho dahil kapag-aral sila sa mga gandang paaralan, no? And they have money to study and pursue kung ano ba yung profesyon na pupuntahan nila. At hindi naman lahat ay kaya, no? Kaya yung iba nag-resort na lang sa mga working class na trabaho na mababa yung pasweldo, na exploited sila, no, na kahit yun na lang, no, yung kitain nila sa pang-araw-araw ay okay na dahil ang syempre, no, yung makarami naman sa atin na gusto na lang ay maituwid yung pang-araw-araw at hindi natin pwedeng sabihin, no, na hindi nagtatrabaho na mabuti itong mga working class dahil fix na yung sahod nila, no, at tumataas yung presyo ng biga, ng mga produkto, ng gas, no. At minsan, no, yung sinasahod nila sa araw-araw ay sakto o kulang, no, para matustusan, no, matugunan yung mga pangangailangan nila sa pang-araw-araw. Makikita talaga natin na yung matagal, no, na paghihirap ng mga working class or yung pananatili nila, no, sa working class ng mga trabaho ay hindi dahil hindi sila nagsisikap, kundi dahil bulok yung sistema na meron tayo, no. na yun, shape talaga yung ano natin, no? Parang shape lang yung utak nila na hindi kasi hindi trabaho mabuti, no? Pero yun, nasa sistema talaga ang problema at hindi dun sa mga working class, no? And at yung ano no, importante kaya importante no na magkaroon talaga sila ng class representation at maipakita no na kaya rin naman nila gawin yung mga trabaho ng mga nasa middle class, you know. It's just that hindi siya talaga accessible, no? At hindi lahat ay equipped para makamit yun. And then, mahalaga, no, na alam ng media kung para kanino ba pinapalabas itong mga palabas, no? Dahil laging target ay masa, no? Eh, kalakhan naman sa mga masa ay parte ng working class, no? Ang laking bilang, ang laking porsyento ay nanggaling sa working class. Kaya't mahalaga, no, na maipakita rin talaga na pag ako, bilang, kunyari, parte man ako ng working class, ay may kita ko yung sarili ko sa telebisyon. No? Pero kasi binubuo siya ng media, no? Para, tignan ng mga tao na ganito dapat yung puntahan, parang gawing goal, no? Yung mga buhay ng mga nasa karakter sa media, no? Tapos, if ever man na gumagawa sila, no, ng mga karakter from working class, kadalasan, parang mga father in working class families is usually ridiculed, no? As an incompetent, although sometimes lovable and buffon. Laging sinasabi na pag working class parang incompetent, no? Pero sa realidad, hindi naman talaga. Kaya no, kaya importante talaga na bukod sa paitingin yung maayos na representasyon ng race and gender, dapat hindi hiwalay, no, yung maayos na representasyon sa class. At talagang magre-reflect, no, kung ano yung nakikita ng mga tao sa nakikita natin, no, sa realidad.
Thank you, Miss CM. Hi, I'm Ivy, and I will be discussing about class shown in tabloid talk shows, reality television, and in news media. First, let's begin with tabloid talk shows and reality television. Sociologist Diana Kendall in the year 2011 said, even a cursory look at media reveals that class clearly permeates media content. In a world where the divide between the classes is so wide, it's important to remember that media content is still intended for a relatively small portion of society. This can be seen in tabloid talk shows and reality television programs. Each tends to help reinforce myths about class. One example of class issues shown in tabloid talk shows is evident in Face to Face. Face to Face is known as a tabloid talk show here in the Philippines. It aired on TV5 from the year 2010 until the year 2013 and was hosted by Ami Perez. It bills itself as a barangay hall on air, with the assistance of the Trio Tagapayo, who represents the legal, emotional, and spiritual disciplines. Face to Face seeks to settle issues between two parties. It is strikingly similar to the Jerry Springer show in the US, but it has a cultural perspective and primarily features marginalized guests. In 2011, a study from the University of the Philippines, it is shown that despite the promise of both systems, face-to-face's restorative justice is not always effectively applied, particularly in cases of domestic abuse. Instead, to promote the institution of the family, face-to-face serves as a means of normalizing the misbehavior of family members. Another example is the program Rafi Tulfo in Action, which has the same format as face-to-face. Every day, hundreds of people register complaints to TV5 for them to be featured in Rafi Tulfo in Action. Program producers sometimes exploit working class and poor people as cheap labor, explicitly seeking contestants they think exhibit stereotypical class attributes to heighten the tension and drama of competitive reality programs, and this is shown in these kinds of programs. These programs are, for many people, their last hope, and their best chance at receiving true justice here in the country. And Rafi Tulfo, today, being the face of justice in our country, should bother us. These shows only demonstrate that justice is unequal for the rich and the poor. One example of class issues shown in reality television is Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Keeping Up with the Kardashians was an American reality television series that focuses on the extravagant lives of the Kardashian Jenner family. Their enduring impact on pop culture, beauty, and fashion helps set new and unrealistic standards of beauty instigated by the media that looking good and pretty is to appear Western and rich. On the other hand, it also contributed to talking about transitioning, particularly on Caitlyn Jenner's journey to her transition. Another example is home makeover programs such as Extreme Makeover Home Edition, Trading Spaces, and Queer Eye, where media studies scholar June Deary observed that in these kinds of program, the affluent class values dominate, that no one goes into a middle class home and makes it over something working class. That formica, a hard, smooth surface material used in tabletops, must be replaced by granite and plastic by steel. The class enters directly into news media content as well. It is said that news in media tends to highlight issues of concern to audiences belonging to the middle and upper class only. In the United States, this can be seen in news reporting on the current stock market situation, where only half of the American families own any stocks, directly or indirectly, such as through mutual funds, pensions, or retirement accounts. Even though Americans do not understand stock related issues, it is still a prominent feature of every news program. Another point is that hard news usually features people in power, like uh, politicians, professionals, and CEOs. That said, media content is often produced by or for people who live in upper or middle class neighborhoods and have access to greater resources than those in poorer areas. But this doesn't mean that media content should be entirely inaccessible, especially when there is a real urgency about creating awareness about the issue of class. We need to remember that people from all walks of life can be affected by the social and political issues we face today, and that we need diversity in our storytelling if we want to truly understand these issues. In conclusion, first, entertainment and news media do not reflect the diversity of the real world. However, by its lack of diversity, media content does reflect the inequality that exists in the social world and in the media industry. Second, inequality is not static, and significant strides have been made in improving the inclusiveness of media representations. Third, underrepresentation is often still a reality that should not be overlooked. And lastly, but the progress made, however, often generated by the actions of advocates, should not be ignored either. That's all. Thank you very much.